Okay, got it.
Hey, everybody. We are live. This is Brian Armentrout with the Food Safety Foundation, and we are here today with a special mystery guest. As a matter of fact, he is so special you can't even see him. That's how special he is. Mr. Alan Saylor. Ta-da! With EAS. Good morning, Alan. How you doing?
I am great. Thanks. Enjoyed being the mystery guest. I hope it's not too mysterious anymore.
With the name on the bottom, right? So yeah, we're live on LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, and Periscope, which is Twitter. So this is Food Safety Chat. This happens every Friday at 8 a.m. Mountain, 10 o'clock Eastern. And Alan is in the East. You are in the DC area, correct?
I am, and it's a beautiful day. Summer, I think, for much of the country, other than maybe where you are, Brian, has reappeared for a day or two. We were quite cold at freezing temperatures even last night, but I think we've got a lovely day and sunny and bright.
Nice. Well, snow's probably, or at least cold weather's coming your way. It's snowing here today in beautiful Colorado, but today and tomorrow I think it's supposed to snow. And then, of course, like as often happens in Colorado, it'll be nice again. So we'll just get through this. And like people say, we need the moisture. So it's all good. So this is for people who are new joining us. And please go in the comments, and I'll do it right now and say hello to everybody. Let us know who you are. Oops, my goodness, learn how to type. Hello. Look at that. Hello, everyone. Please, type in the comments. Let us know your name, where you're from. Say hello to us this morning. Or say hello. Hey, Lancaster, Pennsylvania. I used to live there. And as you can tell by the fact that I know how to pronounce it, I ran quality assurance for Bond Grain Cheese in New Holland, Pennsylvania. So right in the middle of the land of the Amish. There was a Tyson plant, or there was at the time in New Holland. And lots of mornings I would be following the turkey truck into the plant with the feathers flying all over my car, which is always interesting, the birds on their way to their fate. So that was pretty cool. With this, and for people who are new joining us, this is different than your normal format. Instead of a webinar where you're just getting the information and you listen, and then afterwards you get the slides and that type of stuff. With our chat here, that's really what we're trying to do here is we want to chat. So we pick a topic every week. And this week is kind of cool in that we voted on the topic. So on LinkedIn, I put 3 different topics up. I put in visitors to your plant. I put in crisis management, and I put in internal audit. And the 4th option is you wanted to talk about something else. And the winner this week was internal audit. It was pretty close. So we'll redo the quiz again next week to let everybody have a say in what we talk about. Crisis management was a close second. So my guess is when we put it up for next week, I bet that one may be the topic for next week. But the purpose of this is to give us some of our expertise in these areas, tips and tricks that we've learned along the way to make these things easier to do. A little of my background, and we'll get into Alan's background too. I ran quality assurance for large CPG, consumer packaged good food companies, and these type of things for over 20 years. And I've had my own consulting firm now for about 5 years now. Also ran the consulting, training, auditing, and certification group for Eurofins North America for a while as well. And the dairy experience that I had is where I got to know Mr. Saylor, and we've known each other a really long time, and he's been a huge factor in that industry. And as a matter of fact, Alan, I'll embarrass you a little bit here. Oh, your picture froze there. We'll see if his picture comes back here, but this is probably a good time to embarrass him while he doesn't have a chance to respond. He's gotten a couple of awards here recently, one of which was the International Dairy Federation 2020 Leadership Award. So Alan, congratulations on that. Very well deserved.
Well, thank you.
Oh, your mic's out. There we go.
It's been one of these interesting. It's been an interesting year where I have 38 years of experience, and I'll certainly go into my background. And you never work for the awards; you work for the satisfaction and getting to interact with amazing people like you, Brian. But an award once in a while is not a bad thing. So it's been fun.
It's always good to have your efforts recognized. So awesome job on that. So Michael asked what's our topic. So hopefully I've answered that for you. Now we're going to be talking about internal audit. So let's kind of dive into that. So as you have questions as we go along, Alan and I are monitoring the comments. So please throw those in there and we will answer those. So I like to start off kind of with a common frame of reference around that. So with internal audit, guys, what are we really talking about? And so because in the food industry here in the US, lots of companies are GFSI certified, and a good chunk of those are under SQF. Figured a good place to start with that is, what is SQF saying relative to internal audits? Because I know for my clients, a lot of times this would be a real source of confusion, and people weren't really sure, Alan, what they were wanting, what the auditor was expecting when he showed up with SQF. So here's what the brand new version 9, which is available on the SQF website for free. So depending on what your standard is, you'll have 2 and the separate module. So 2 is the systems. So 254 is what we'll kind of be talking about here within that section. So here's what internal audits is looking for. And I'm not going to read this verbatim, but I'll give you kind of the general, right? So they're saying they want to know the methods and responsibility for scheduling and conducting internal audits to verify the effectiveness of the system, and that needs to be documented. So what they're saying is, you just can't create a system and then just let it sit. You have to go and make sure that that system is working correctly, and you have to have a procedure that you follow when you do that. Now, if you hang around to the end of the webinar and send me your email after we get through our chat today, I'll send you a nice little recording form that I have used that works really, really well for scheduling your internal audits. So just let me know if you'd like that. I'm happy to send that to you. So you need to cover within your internal audit program all of the different areas, right? You just can't do one and call it good. You've got to be looking at all the different areas and figure out how to break that up. You need to gather evidence. Are these things being followed correctly? And one of the things, Alan, that I've been a big proponent of in my quality career is the basics. And for me, one of the basics is plan, do, check, act. And that's really what this is asking for. It's, what are you doing? How do you check and make sure that those things are working correctly? If it's not working correctly, what are you doing then to go back and correct what was incorrect that you thought you were doing, right? So plan, and you do, then you check that. Then you've got to act upon that to make sure you get those things back in alignment. So you need to have that evidence. And then people who are doing the audits need to be trained. And inspections of the site shall be planned and carried out to verify GMPs, right? So they're specifically calling out GMPs, and then you got to have records of that stuff, right? So that's it, right, Alan? I mean, they're not asking for a ton of stuff there.
Well, yeah, and I'm one of these fundamental guys. I'm not as creative as you, Brian. So I always like to look at how do we start. And I know that this is a pretty broad and free-ranging conversation. And my experience with audits and setting up audits and planning audits, and they're internal audits, external audits, it is very much the same. Is you have to understand the scope. And this, I'm not trying to make this too bureaucratic, but what is the scope? What are you attempting to do with an internal audit? Well, are you doing it based on a company requirement? Are you doing it based on a customer requirement? Are you doing it on a GSFI like SQF, BRC? And Brian did a great job. You did a great job of bringing in the SQF, and I think SQF is as good a reference as any for the internal audits. Now, of course, we could use other references too, like FDA. FDA, oh, that's right. FDA doesn't require an internal audit, do they, for foods? Oh, okay, so we can't use FDA but can we use, there's a document called the IOM, the Inspection Operations Manual of FDA. And if you really want to get into the details, if you want the War and Peace version of how to do an internal audit, you can go into the FDA IOM, and I don't have the section. Certainly we can provide that if you are interested. And they have some fundamentals about how they want their field staff doing. They call them inspections, and I understand the difference fundamentally between inspection and audit, but a lot of the things are similar. So scope. And then what do you do after the scope? Well, you need to have a plan. And it's like, oh no, I don't need to have a plan. I know what I'm going to do. Right, Brian?
Exactly. Yeah, you got to have a plan.
Oh, okay. So if we're in agreement on that, and it can be simple, it can be bullets, it can be the same plan. Are you doing an internal audit annually to meet a customer, your corporate requirement, or an GFSI requirement? Or what is the purpose? And what I see sometimes is that internal audits are done because the element is too big to eat at one time. So we do this quarter, we do a piece, and we have to identify what the scope and the plan for that is. The next quarter, another, and over the course of a year, we have essentially eaten the elephant called the internal audit requirement. So just like your thoughts on that particular approach, do we do it all at once? Do we once a year? Frequency? Do we do parts at different times? I'd love to hear what you think, Brian.
Well, I think you hit on an important point, because this is where I think a lot of times people who are responsible for setting this up really take too much on. So for example, if I'm the quality manager in the plant, and we'll stick with the SQF example here, but absolutely right. So FSMA, if you work in the environmental health and safety office and you're going to be doing OSHA inspections internally, all of these things apply. So if I'm the quality manager and I need to set up to meet the requirements of the standard under SQF, under 254, and I say, okay, I need to set up internal audits. A lot of times the fatal flaw that the quality managers make is they think that they have to do it. And if you set out to be the internal auditor for the entire program, you're gonna fail, because you will not have enough time to look at all the elements that are in the SQF standard under, in most cases, 2 and 11, right? You're gonna drive yourself nuts.
Yeah, can I add a kind of a war story to support what you just said? I was in a facility, this was a few years ago, not ancient history, but maybe bordering on that. And I was there to train on GMPs. Now, I know that is a far field of our subject of internal audits today, but in order to make it interesting, because every food plant trains on GMPs at least once a year, and it's the same tape, the same CD, the same people giving the training. And so how do you make this interesting so people pay attention? And
Right.
so what I did is I give examples as I was doing the training, but we were sitting in a plant on a Saturday morning when the facility was shut down. And this was a large open area that probably would not be done today. But my point of this is, at the end, and I told this from the beginning, I had sheets and I knew where every one of the 40 people in the training was assigned to do their work. And I gave them a checklist for a different area. And I said, after we were done, please take the checklist, go to this area, and see what you can find. I had gone through all of the areas, made my own list. So this wasn't trying to test them. It was more to see if they had paid attention. And the outcome, Brian, it essentially was, to your point, an internal audit, but we didn't have the quality assurance people involved. We had the production people, and I'm not saying that's always the best way to go, but what was amazing from this little outcome was that not only did they do an excellent job, and none of these people had been trained in auditing or the details, they were production people responsible for their various areas. They actually found things I had completely missed. And the idea, they actually thought it was fun. Whereas, if it's the QA or the QA department, oh hum, this is another quarter internal audit, I've got to do it this way, and it's got to be a requirement. So to your point, there's different ways to do it.
Nice. And you know what, Alan? I can't believe I forgot this, right? I was so excited to get in our topic that I forgot our drink of coffee, right, this morning. So everybody else who's on the line, right, pick up your drink, and I've got my trusty coffee. Alan, I take it you have a beverage there of your choice.
I do.
So keep nice. Aren't you fancy? Look at that. All right. Very nice. Very nice. Yeah, this is my my Ember mug. I don't know if you've seen this, Alan, or not, but
No.
This is a heated mug. And no affiliation with the company. My wife bought one and she absolutely loves it. Made me go out and buy one. It's amazing. It keeps your beverage warm while you're drinking it, instead of that problem you have with coffee where it gets cold. So gotta love that.
And for me, with my propensity for dairy products, it could keep my different products cold. So I love it. I'll see if I can find one. Give me advice, shoot me an email.
Absolutely. So I think your story is a perfect example of what we refer to when you're looking at auditing these type of things, or even anybody coming to visit a plant, is fresh eyes, right? People who aren't used to that environment always see new things that you don't see, because people are creatures of habit. And when you're out on the floor and you're walking around, if you're the production manager, the quality manager, or whoever in the plant, you get this. right? You're focused in on your task, and you're not looking around. You're not looking at the ceiling and noticing the water that's dripping. You're not noticing the guy who's not wearing his hairnet quite right. You don't see stuff that's laying on the floor. It's that new perspective. And when you come in there and you see these things, people are always flabbergasted because they're like, oh my God, I walk by this every single day and I don't see it. And you're like, yes, that's what internal audits are good at. Getting people out of their routine and looking at things from a new perspective. And back to the quality manager. If you are that quality manager responsible for the internal audit program, and you know that when that third-party auditor is coming by, he's going to ask you about your program, right? And you're going, oh, okay, I got to get this thing done. You need those fresh eyes. You need a team. And so you need to go to and build and recruit a team from everybody in your plant. And frankly, the way I look at it, the more, the better. And it doesn't have to be people from the floor. It can be people from the front office. It can be the person in charge of procurement. It can be anybody you want on that team. And better, and the more people, the better. And you want to then build them up into groups of 2. And one of the things that the SQF standard talked about, which you need to do, is you need to train them on how to audit. Now, you don't need to send them out to a fancy class. You can do that yourself. You're qualified to do that. Teach them how to audit. Auditing is an extremely valuable tool, right? It's something, Alan, that we use in our lives all the time, and we don't even really think about it, right? We're constantly going through standards and checklists and different things in our mind that we need to do to function.
Right. And one of the resources, and I usually don't mention organizations by name because there are a lot of good ones, but to your point about training, ASQ has on demand training for, it's called basic auditing and then advanced. And this is not, as you said, needed for everybody. But if you are responsible for leading the program, or you and somebody else, I would really recommend that you sign up. And I think the break in the fees, which are not, I think the basic was like $150, $175 if you're a member. And if you're not a member, you pay much higher. So it's cheaper to just join ASQ, and there's a lot of benefits from it. And then take these 2 online courses. But I want to challenge you, Brian, with something that I had heard early in my career, is that I'm an auditor. I came out of the automotive industry, or I came out of the airline industry. And I've got all of these Six Sigma and lean manufacturing and ASQ. I've got all these certifications. I have never been in the bakery industry. I've never been in the seafood industry. I've never been in the dairy industry. But you know what? I can audit anything without any previous or prior experience or knowledge of the processing in that industry. Is there any, this may be less applicable in internal audits, but we are seeing lots of migration out of non-food sectors into the food sector. And do you believe this is true? Can I audit without having any knowledge of what I'm auditing?
Well, so that's a good point. So a couple of questions, not questions, but a war story for me on that, and then kind of what is in place at certification bodies like Eurofins. So early on in my career, I had an audit, and it was an ISO 9001 audit, so another standard, right? And the auditor came in, and this was a food plant, and he came from automotive, and he did not understand how we did things at all. And he was kind of jumping over into consulting, which is a huge no-no, and was giving me advice on how to do things. So one of the tools that's really big in the automotive industry and other similar industries is failure mode analysis, so FEMA type analysis. And he kept asking me, well, where's your FEMA analysis for this process? And I'm like, I don't, what are you talking about? What's FEMA? And he's like, right. And he starts teaching me this process with FEMA. Great for what he did, not good for what we did, right? We were making cream cheese, not cars. And it didn't translate over, and the audit didn't go very well at all. Now, in the auditing world, there are very, very strict standards. So with the Global Food Safety Initiative, you have the standards underneath. So we're talking about SQF today, and there's BRCGS and FSSC and all these other standards that are for lack of a better word, sanctioned under the GFSI umbrella. So they have rules in place with that. So it's very, very strict on who can do what. So for myself, for example, if I was to apply to become an auditor, I would go to, SQF and sign up and then give them my credentials and say, okay, I've worked in dairy for 20 years and all these type of things. And they would say, okay, well, based upon your experience or anything else, here's the categories within that standard that you're allowed to audit to. And they don't let you allow to jump over between. Now, to your point, it's an interesting point that you're bringing up, Alan, in that the auditing skills are the same, right? But what to look for may be different, right?
I think so. And to support what you're saying, and I'd love to hear more about that thought, but I did want to interject here that FDA had a system where they believed that they could train their field staff and then they could send them into a pharmaceutical plant today, a grain elevator tomorrow, a seafood processing. And that was a model they have used for the last 30 years. Mm-hmm. And you know what they found? As the processing became more, some cases more computerized, more complex, and the root cause analysis became very difficult, much more challenging, is they actually had to change the model. So I think it was in 2017, I believe.
That's pretty recent.
And that they actually started, and I think today it's pretty much completed, completely reorganized their field staff. So they now have specialists, sector specialists. And so I think that goes to show a little bit like your story about the auditor with automotive background. You are really limited if you do not know the subject matter of what you're auditing. So anyway, just that thought.
Well, yeah, another thought kind of on the FDA side too, right, is people are people and they have backgrounds and they have interests and they have things that they are passionate about. So if with the old FDA model, I may really understand and have a real affinity for medical device, and I really understand what needs to be done. And then they send me into a food plant. Well, okay, right? I'm here. I'm not necessarily happy about it. I'll get through it. But man, I want to go and deal with more medical device companies. So I think it was a great move by FDA to do that. Now, part of it was the logistics within how they're organized and how do you send auditors out to different regions and all this stuff. And I think they pretty much got that ironed out.
Good. I've got another question, and this is something that came up recently with a client of ours. We have standard forms that we allow our independent consultants to use when they're doing, we call them assessments, but it's an auditing principle, certainly. And they're scored or they're not scored. And we don't really have a preference. We let the client tell us, do you want us to score it or not? What is your opinion about scoring these internal audits? Any experience, any thoughts?
That's a good question. And definitely everybody here on the line too, please jump in and ask us questions too. We'd love to answer your questions. I don't think it should be scored, right? Because you're looking at a very specific area. So in the internal audit, right, you've got all the requirements under 2 and 11, going back to the SQF standard again, and then you've got your teams. Now, one of the things with the teams after you train them is they're never going to audit their own stuff. And they're going in and they're looking at something very specific. So let's say 2.2, they're looking at document control. And within quality, I have a document control administrator who is overseeing the overall management of all the flow of documents in the SQF system. So creation of documents, approval of documents, distribution, obsolescence of the old documents, all those type of things that you need to do under that requirement. You put together your audit team. Rule number 1, you never audit your own stuff, right? So the document control administrator is never going to audit her stuff. So let's say on that audit team, they come in, Alan, and you have a mechanic from the maintenance shop and you have a person in procurement, right? They read through the procedure, they see how the procedure says it's supposed to be done, and then they go and they talk with the document control administrator. So really all you're doing there, right, is you're saying, okay, here's what you say you do. Show us that you do this, right? And this gets back to plan, do, check, act, right? So, I mean, the scoring side of it doesn't really provide any help. It's did you do what you said you do or not? And if it's not, then that goes back to the quality manager who's overseeing the audit program to figure out, well, that's really interesting. I'm going to go figure out from a corrective action standpoint with the team why this deviated from what we thought we were doing. So it's kind of a pass fail type thing, right? So if you were to have a scoring, it would essentially be 100% or fail, right? Because you want them to be following the procedure exactly as it's written.
Yeah, one of my experiences, and it's very apropos to this benchmark kind of we're using, is the GSFI or SQF or BRC, is these are all scored. Now, there are a few minor exceptions, but they're scored. And my experience, and I support exactly what you said, I don't believe in scoring, because unfortunately, then the score overshadows the problems and the effort to correct. So I know that we have seen people that we've got a 98 or a 95, or, you know, when I was in college, if I got above a 75, I was excited. But obviously in auditing, that probably is a failure. But my point is, scoring is in most cases detrimental. It's very helpful if you have a performance criteria that says your facility has to score above 90, and otherwise you won't get your bonus for the year. But that should not, that really is counterproductive. And then we lose track of the follow-ups and what is important and what needs to be done, the corrective actions, root cause analysis. I see that sometimes being it's lost in its importance.
Mm-hmm. Well, you make a good point, because a lot of times when you're doing a corporate audit or you're doing a third-party audit and you're doing that closeout meeting, that's always the first question that's asked. What's our score? What did we get? What's our score? Kind of missing the point. You're kind of missing the point, right? It's not all about that, but we want to have a metric all the time associated with that. And with internal audit, the whole point of the internal audit program is to find the skeletons in the closet, to find the mistakes, to find the things aren't quite right, and fix them before someone outside of the facility finds them. Right? We want to fix them ourselves.
I agree. One of the interesting things when I was early in my career, and I probably didn't have as much of an understanding of processing and the various sectors, how they process the foods. One of the things that I used, and I think is very helpful, is consistency. So in other words, in an internal audit, you're in this facility all the time, so the fact that you're not familiar is unlikely. But if you're relatively new, you took a new position, or you're promoted within, and you never really had to do something like this before, I would strongly encourage you to look at consistency. And I'd love to hear what Brian will say, but I'll give you my experience. I was in a very large facility in Europe, a food facility, and they had multiple streams because they were putting out so much product. They couldn't have one line of production. They had like 4. And in order to stage their ingredients, they had a facility across the alley that they staged all their ingredients. They measured everything. So the operator didn't have to do anything but open bags, open cans, dump everything in, and away the system went. That's great. In 2 of the 4 lines, the ingredient prep area was a high hygienic area, and it had very strict requirements. It wasn't a double airlock, but it was very strict, and who could go in there and such. The other 2, because apparently they expanded and they didn't have room, is they identified a part of the warehouse, which was across this alley too. And in there, it was all, they built a little room, but it didn't have positive air pressure. Anybody could go in there. It was a nice area because it was bigger and nicer than the rest of the warehouse. So it became kind of a meeting point. And so the plant was so massive, was I going to find everything in this internal audit they wanted? It was external, but I was actually working for them, so it was internal. And no, but as soon as I saw that, I asked them. And in the beginning, they said we've done this forever. There's been no problems, no product. I said, think about the processes. You are not consistent. There is a reason why you set a high hygienic standard for this ingredient assembly area, and for 2 you're following and 2 you're not. So consistency, like what tools do we have?
Well, and I think, again, that demonstrates the fresh eyes principle, right? They walk by that every day and nobody noticed that disparity between those different lines.
Yep.
A lot of times you'll hear it verbalized as, we've always done it that way. right?
Yeah. I do have to share one other thing I'd like your thoughts on is this. Is an internal audit, does it need to include talking to people? I'm in the plant every day. I know most of these people. Um, I know what they're supposed to be doing. And, I've done this for many quarters, many years, maybe. So let me just look around, look at records, look at things like this. And the reason I asked that question, again, I was doing an external, so external audits and internal, they have some important differences that you have to recognize. But this is the first time a part of the scope of the audit was to talk to people in production. And of course, we did not bother them while they were doing their jobs. We arranged for time during breaks, and we asked questions. Now, they had been prepped. They knew we were coming, unlike sometimes where it's not announced. And your internal audits, I'd like to hear what you think about whether you should be announcing or not. But the point of this little experience was that we really thought we would not allow supervisors to be in with us as we were doing our audit. So did we get information? Yes, but it was interesting because they were prepped, because the responses to various questions were almost always identical, almost like they had a card that they were looking at. But with a few exceptions, we had some people that were very unhappy. And when you do these individual interviews to support your internal audit, be careful what you hope for, because you might get it. Because we got stories about who had done this to that, what was happening outside the production facility. So I was going to say, it's when you talk to people, people are fascinating, and just be prepared to get information that may be helpful or not helpful.
Absolutely. And to answer your question, by the way, Helen just joined. Helen, we know Helen, so nice to see you, Helen. Hope things are going well. Should you talk to people? Oh God, yes. Should you talk to people, right? Part of the failure of what we do in quality, I'm guilty of it. Anybody who writes documents, you've really, really got to watch out for this, is the belief, the completely 100% false belief that if you create a document and you create a procedure and you write it down and you give it to somebody, that they're going to do it. No. If you do that without their input, they're going to keep doing things the way they do it. You have this hidden factory, right? And it's kind of around the idea of, okay, great. Here's what the quality guy said. I'm here to train you. Let me show you how we really do it. And if those things sink into your system like cancer, right? And it all comes up like this. If it sinks into your system and you don't know it's there, you've got a big problem, huge problem, right? And if you don't find that during your internal audits, guess who is going to find it, right? The SQF auditor or the FSSC auditor. They're going to come in and say, oh, well, according to this procedure for this process, you do this. No, don't do that. Oh, really? Click, click. How comes the red pen, right? Fish in a barrel, right? You always, always, always create your documentation based upon what actually happens on the floor. If you find out that you don't like it, well, then you got to find out why, right? One of the easiest ways I've found to figure that out is recording forms, right? So that documentation where people are writing stuff down of what they're doing. If you create a recording form and you say, hey guys, here's a recording form for writing down let's say it's at a filling machine, right? The weights and the seals and making sure you got the right label and all these type of things that they're going to be checking when they're running that machine. Give them that form based on their input. Say, hey guys, I've redone this form. I've made it easier to do. I've taken all your input. Try it out, test it out, see what you think. If you get that form back and there's little squiggles on the side and people are crossing stuff out and things aren't filled out, you got it wrong. You got it wrong, right? That's the whole point of internal audits, is you're trying to find out, okay, here's what we think we're doing. Are we really doing it? So in your example, Alan, those supervisors who were coaching their team, big mistake, big mistake, because you're actually perpetuating those myths. And the supervisor, subconsciously is training his team to act subversively. Right? Tell them what they want to hear and they'll go away. Ooh,
Well, that's true. Let me ask you another thing I encountered is, and the question to you is this really important to be done in internal audit? So I was assisting again and went into a facility, and they're very proud because they said they had 545 SOPs to operate a relatively simple, large but simple processing plant. And so I thought, okay, well, I'll go in, and if there's a problem, then I'll look at them. And I started seeing odd things, and let's put it that way. So I did dig into the SOPs, and there were SOPs that were from last year, from this year, from 5 years ago, 10 years ago, because what happened is as personnel responsible for doing the document control and the SOPs left, and they didn't always, the new people just came in and said, well, I'm going to write my own.
yeah.
Is that the responsibility of an internal auditor to really assess whether there's a viable operational document system, or should we just look at what's going on out on the floor? And if they've got 3 SOPs for the same responsibility, who cares?
Well, I tell you, Alan, you're hitting on some really good points, right? This is a great way for internal audit to root that stuff out, because this is exactly right. A quality manager comes in, does his thing. Let's say he does a great job and he gets promoted and he goes off to corporate. Now you got the new quality manager who comes in and he wants to do things differently and writes all new stuff and doesn't get rid of the old stuff. And you end up with these piles and piles and piles of documents. I have a saying, simple is hard, right? Creating a dedicated, elegant food safety system that meets the requirements of the standard and does it in one place only in your systems and is satisfactory to the auditors. And more importantly, I mean, if I could underline that, I would. More importantly is actually how you manage your plant. That's really hard to do because people think that more documents is better. And that is false, right? If you have, we'll go back to our 2.2 example, document control. You need to have one document control process in that plant. Now, keep in mind, you have many different standards, and people get confused on this too. So you have, we'll keep with our example of SQF and OSHA, right? So you have under SQF all kinds of requirements, and then the environmental health and safety person has their requirements. A lot of times they'll throw all that stuff into one system. My advice, don't do it. Do not do it. If the environmental health and safety guy wants advice on how to manage his documents and set it up, wonderful, happy to help. But that person is responsible for maintaining and managing their own documents. And the document control administrator may help and do document control management for your SQF system and for your OSHA compliance system, but the two should never meet. Keep them separate.
Very good. One of the challenges I have found in my career of being an auditor or a government inspector or a consultant is the love to walk through the facility, love to see what's going on, love to be the voyeur, if you will, of what is going on. And maybe that has to be a part of any good auditor. But that isn't all. We have to look at records.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I've locked up here, my picture went away, but the records part is one of these that many times is the forgotten. It's put at the end of the list of things to do for my internal audit. And if I don't get time, I've looked at the operation. I've made sure that all the updated documents are signed and so forth. And we've got a corrective, we've got a change form. They followed that. But today we're generating massive amounts of records. When I started, we really operated plants based on experience by the seat of our pants and not a whole lot of data because we didn't have much. We just knew what was right and what isn't. Mm-hmm. We knew it if we saw it. Today, we have got sensors everywhere. We've got electronic data capture systems that go right into computers. How do we reasonably manage this records overload? How can an internal auditor even begin to be competent in saying that I've looked at the records and they are fine?
Right. Well, I mean, good point. And part of this is, and with FDA now under the Food Safety Modernization Act, they have access to a lot more stuff than they had before. And they're learning and understanding. And really now, as I say, the curtain's been pulled back and FDA is getting a really good look at how we manage food safety. Where in the past, depending on what industry you're in, maybe they couldn't look at a whole lot of stuff. But the reason I bring this up, Alan, is that FDA has a mantra now associated with their inspections, right? Is if you don't document it, it didn't happen. So if you're doing your hazard analysis for your food safety plan and there's something where there was no hazards and you don't write down no hazards, you didn't do it, right? So these records become extremely important. It's back to plan, do, check, act. Here's the procedure. Here's how we say we do it. Great. Show me the proof that you did it. 2.1 management review. Okay, there's requirements under there. Here's how you perform management review. Awesome. Show me the record of your last management review. If there's no record, it didn't happen.
That's interesting. One of the things that I came across, and I learned this from somebody else, is that some of the advanced CIP systems, and most food plants have some equipment that is CIP-able. They capture lots of data, just as my analogy for sensors in the production side. And many times it's captured on computers. So when the auditor or the internal auditor wants to look, there's reams. And so therefore, some of us are a little more advanced. We're okay with looking at a computer screen, but still, how do we compare them? So what I was taught by somebody is there are exception reports. So it's not that you don't want to acknowledge that people are doing things right, but if you are inundated with massive numbers of records that you're responsible for reviewing as part of your internal audit, maybe you start with exception reports. I don't know if you've had experience with that, Brian, but.
Well, definitely. And that I think, Alan, comes from views from other industries, right? I worked in medical device for a couple of years when I first got out of college, and you had exception logs, right? So if something didn't go to plan, you were required to go in there and write down what it was and what happened. And let's say that an autoclave load, a validated autoclave load, didn't reach temperature within the specified time. You would have to create an exception report for that and then follow up with corrective actions and these type of things. Valuable. Now, it can be a shortcut then for the external auditor, right? Oh, okay, great. I'm just going to go through your exception log and find out you've already prepared for me all the things that you've done wrong. So that's not right either. So, I mean, really under this piece with internal audit, right? I think we're showing here, and again, this is something, Alan, that I think for these weekly food safety chats that this shows up is when you go to talk about a particular topic, right? Internal audit and what we've been talking about here is the demonstration of how intertwined all of these different things are within your systems, right? You can't just think of each element under any standard as a standalone thing, right? These are all together, right? Corrective action, internal audit, document control, supplier specification and approvals, all these type of things all weave together. And the purpose of your internal audit program is to get a snapshot in time at that particular point of how's this thing working, right? Is it doing what we need it to do to help us make safe, high quality product? And any good internal audit program is going to help you do that. It gives you those fresh eyes, right? And you need to look at everything. And again, to kind of wrap this up then for the conversation side of it is, right, you're going through as the quality manager, rule number one, again, to kind of bring this back around, is don't take it on yourself. You're the manager of this process. You lead the teams, you evaluate the team's progress, you look at the corrective actions, you make sure that those audits get done, you train those guys, right? You're the general leading this whole process. You're not the soldier. Your job is to set up that schedule and train your teams, right? And then send your teams out into the plant. Don't make them do all the audits in 1 month. Break it out through the year. Rotate your teams. And you'll see that on this example chart that I put together. Put together, ideally 5 to 10. If you're a big plant, you want a lot of teams of 2 people. Never one person by themselves, 2 people. Put 2 people on a team so they can bounce things off each other. And then assign them these different things. So in January, you're going to do management review. In February, you're going to do document control, all the way on through the standard. So by the time you get to January, to your point earlier, Alan, you've chewed that elephant one bite at a time. You don't have to do it all at once. Plus, you want it spread out through the year because your system is changing, right? You want to make sure that If you created a bunch of stuff in January, is that stuff still working in August, or has something changed, right? Go out and talk with the guys on the floor and say, hey, here's this procedure. It says you're doing this. No, I don't do that. Oh, really? What changed, right? Finding that stuff is extremely valuable. And again, with your internal audit program, find these things before the third-party auditor, your customer, FDA, USDA, whoever it is that's coming in your plant finds these things, because you want to find them before they do, because you don't want a 483.
That's great. And I know we're getting to the end, Brian, but I'm going to challenge you, since you are the host for this, that in this era of COVID, virtual inspections and virtual audits are now becoming a necessity, and probably have been a necessity for a while. And at some future date, probably not today, I would love to have a discussion about virtual. Can you actually do a virtual internal audit? And it says, well, wait a minute, that's counterintuitive. But no, what happens if I just talked to somebody last night that he is head of regulatory affairs for 58 food plants in the United States, and he cannot get to all of them. And granted, he's got a team, but in some cases, the plant does not let anybody outside, even if you are part of the company, into the facility, just because of various reasons. So anyway, I just want to put that as an option for you to think about.
That's a good point, right? And so internal audit can happen at the corporate, it can happen at the plant. And internal audit, really, I think when you bring it back up to that question, which is a great observation, is your internal audit is about change, right? You're trying to make sure that as your plant grows or your company grows and changes, and you mergers and acquisitions and all these type of things, that you're still doing what you thought you were doing. And you have to keep on top of that. Super, super important. So, I see Paul's there, and Helen made a very good point, and apologize for this. A whole lot of he's and not a lot of she's, definitely. So within quality assurance, lots of women work in the quality assurance area, and Helen is absolutely right, and they do an amazing job. So thank you, Helen. See, Paul's here from Toronto, our good friend Paul. Did anybody have any other questions here as we're closing out this internal audit topic? Again, right, super important. It's something I think a lot of times that's overlooked. I've got a nice example spreadsheet, again, a Word document that you can use to start planning out your internal audits. If you want that, my email's right there, and we have Alan's email as well if you have other questions for him. You don't necessarily have to ask these questions live, but if you have questions, email them to us after the fact if you want to think about it. Let's see, so Becky's got a question here. Do you have an example of the best internal audit program you have seen? Good question. Alan, what do you think? Have you seen a really awesome program?
I've seen very good ones. I've never seen one, and I'm not trying to be smart or all-knowing, because I'm not, but everyone I've seen needed some additional advice. And I like what you said. To answer Becky's question, it may be answered best by what you said. Have somebody else look at it. If you don't want to take this outside the company, which obviously we probably don't want to do, have somebody else look at it and give you feedback, because and again, you can have the best plan if it's not implemented properly.
Right. I think, yeah. So Becky, from my perspective, I think Alan had some really good points around this earlier. I think that kind of dovetail into this. Make it fun, right? Make it fun. You're on an adventure, right? You're out there doing Where's Waldo, right? You're trying to find things that shouldn't be there. You're trying to identify this, and also play up the angle of, this is your opportunity. If you work in procurement, you get to learn what the maintenance guys actually do, right? How do they do work orders? How do they decide in the plant what things need preventive maintenance? How do they follow up? What happens if they issue a work ticket and that work didn't get done that week? Do we just go and kind of move on to the next week's work, or does that all start piling up? How does that work? And so it's rewarding then for the person doing the auditing, because it helps broaden their perspective, right? And it helps them understand where they work and how they do things, and that what she is doing in that capacity is part of that overall bigger picture, right? So internal auditing can be a very rewarding experience for people. Let's see here.
I know Paul's got a question. I'm going to add a very quick comment, and that is that when we're doing internal audits and we find things, the premise is always, was there a correction or corrective action? And so, you want to reward people and departments if indeed things go wrong. Things go wrong every day. We're human, equipment breaks, systems malfunction, a sensor is out of whack, whatever, things happen. But the idea is, what do you do when you find, what did they do when they found it? And so if indeed it was taken care of, maybe it doesn't even rise to the level of being reported on your internal audit system. The last thing I want to say very quickly is we have to have follow-up. You can have the best internal audit program. You can be the best internal auditor in the world. And if your report falls on deaf ears and there's no follow-up, this is all for naught. Thank you.
Excellent point, right? Which gets back to food safety culture, right? We're building a culture, right? I'm always amazed, Alan, on these calls, right? 50 minutes. This time flew, absolutely flew. And this is a fantastic topic that I know that people sometimes are challenged with figuring out the best way to do it. So your expertise under this, greatly appreciated, Alan. So thanks for joining us today. Really glad you're able to do it.
My pleasure.
And again, guys, so if you have additional questions that you want to take offline, our emails are here. We are here to help, right? Food safety is not a point of competition. We're all in this together. And we need to figure out how to do these things to make everyone better. Because if one company has a recall, all of the companies and all the businesses in that sector all suffer. So again, this is Brian with the Food Safety Foundation and Alan Saylor with EAS Consulting. And we hope that everybody has a good weekend. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thanks, Brian. Take care, everyone.